The morning Daniel Whitaker vanished was so ordinary it hurt to remember. Cereal bowls still sat on the kitchen table, his sneakers by the front door, his favorite action figure half buried in the backyard sandbox. He was 9, freckled, sharp-witted, and never the type to wander far. His mother had gone upstairs to fold laundry, his father was trimming hedges outside, and when they called for him minutes later, the house answered with nothing but a silence that would stretch for 20 years. There were no broken locks, no footprints, no strange cars on the street. The police searched the neighborhood, the woods behind the house, even the sewer drains. Nothing. Flyers went up. Interviews were conducted. The new house, barely 6 months old, became a monument to dread. People whispered about the land it was built on, about cursed corners and blind spots, but the official story was simpler. An abduction, likely quick and planned. The case went national for a week, until it didn't. The family, gutted by the absence, began to implode. His mother losing sleep, his father losing faith. And through it all, the house sat untouched, boxy and beige, a suburban shell that somehow swallowed a child whole. Every door checked, every attic scanned, but no one thought to check the walls. What happened next will shock you. But before we continue, hit that subscribe button for more stories like this. The weeks that followed Daniel's disappearance were a blur of flashing lights, clipped radio chatter, and front lawns trampled by search teams and hopeful neighbors. His parents, once the picture of quiet contentment, fractured under the weight of not knowing. His mother, Elise, took to standing by the window at night, whispering his name into the dark as if it might echo back with an answer. His father, Mark, stopped shaving, stopped speaking, and eventually stopped sleeping altogether. The police clung to the abduction theory, but without witnesses or physical evidence, even that began to feel like fiction. Flyers curled under rain gutters. Tip lines went quiet. A detective visited weekly, then monthly, then not at all. Rumors bloomed like mold. Some whispered about a drifter, others about cults, even wild claims of alien abduction, but none held water. After a year, the living room still smelled like Daniel's shampoo, his schoolwork still magneted to the fridge. But grief like that isn't sustainable. It rots the floorboards. Mark took a job in another state, hoping to outrun the silence. Elise refused at first, then relented when she realized staying wouldn't bring her boy back. The house, once a symbol of their fresh start, became a tomb with crown molding. They packed it all, photos, toys, even the yellow raincoat he never liked, and left the keys on the counter. A new family moved in, unaware that every inch had already been searched, every creak already catalogued in a mother's mind. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the blueprint they were given didn't match the one that mattered. Over the next 20 years, the house on Wrenwood Drive changed hands like a cursed heirloom no one wanted to admit was cursed. Families came and went. Some stayed a few years, others barely made it a season. Each new occupant added their own coat of paint, a swing set, a garden bed, layers meant to bury the unease, to mask the fact that something never quite felt right. Children whispered of cold spots that clung to certain corners, even in the peak of summer. Pets refused to go near the far wall in the basement, and pipes moaned at night like they were echoing old grief. One family claimed to hear scratching behind the drywall, but blamed squirrels. Another swore they heard whispering beneath the vents, but chalked it up to faulty ductwork and bad dreams. The house didn't scream. It simply pulsed with quiet wrongness, like a bad tooth you learn to chew around. Over time, the legend faded. Just another unsolved case, another lost boy, another suburban ghost story. until the Morenos bought it in the spring of 2021, eager to renovate and flip it. The first few weeks were uneventful, but when the contractor pulled down drywall to update the wiring, he paused. Behind the insulation, the framing didn't match the blueprint he'd been given. Measurements were off. A hallway ended too soon. There was a void where there shouldn't be. Most assumed it was just shoddy workmanship from the original builders until someone found the sealed panel, expertly hidden behind layers of paint and framing. It wasn't just bad carpentry, it was deliberate. And what lay beyond wasn't on any map, any walkthrough, or any blueprint ever filed with the city. The discovery began with a drill and a flicker, a wire that didn't run where it should have, a stud that shouldn't have been there at all. The contractor, a meticulous man with decades of renovations behind him, paused as the measurements stubbornly refused to align with the original blueprints. Curious and increasingly unsettled, he traced the odd layout to the basement's rear wall, where layers of drywall met with an unnatural seam, almost too perfect to notice. Behind it, after some careful demolition, they found a narrow passageway, dusty, unfinished, barely wide enough to walk through sideways. The air was thick, unmoved for decades, stale like something buried alive. At the end of the corridor was a door. It wasn't like the other doors in the house. This one was solid, unpainted, with no handle on the inside. When it creaked open, the flashlight beams quivered. A small, windowless room emerged from the dark. The walls were soundproofed with foam and cheap insulation. The ceiling was low, almost oppressive. In one corner sat a cracked plastic chair, a child's blanket folded with impossible care, and a single bare bulb dangling above like an interrogation light that had been turned off long ago. But what chilled the contractor most wasn't the silence or the dust or the crude construction. It was the fact that the room had been built into the house from the very beginning. This wasn't an addition. It wasn't a panic room. It was intentional, hidden, forgotten. A secret so carefully buried it survived 2 decades of owners and inspections without a whisper. And now that it was exposed, the house no longer felt like it had secrets. It felt like it had confessed. The air inside the hidden room was the kind that clung to skin, thick with mildew and the ghost of something far worse. Every surface told a story that no child should have lived long enough to draw. Crayon-scrawled figures danced along the padded walls, crude stickmen with X's for eyes and mouths frozen in silent screams, as if a child had been trying to explain what words had failed to capture. In one corner, a thin mattress lay sunk in on itself, the cover stained with time, and something darker, something the light barely dared to touch. Beside it, a broken toy truck, its wheels missing, its paint long chipped away, rested as though waiting for small fingers that would never return. The bulb above swayed slightly, casting shadows that made the room feel like it breathed. No windows, no ventilation, no clock to mark the passage of time. Just 4 padded walls and a door with no lock on the inside, only one on the out. Whoever built this had planned for someone to stay here, not for a night, for a long time. The insulation muffled all sound, cries, banging, even hope. It wasn't just a room. It was a tomb that had once waited patiently behind drywall and good intentions. And in that moment, every creak of the old house above, every cold spot once dismissed, every whisper of a child's voice that neighbors had chalked up to the wind, they all snapped into place like the final piece of a grotesque puzzle. This wasn't a forgotten space. It had been remembered, built and sealed with intention, and it had held something, or someone, for far too long. The moment authorities stepped into the hidden room, the tone shifted from eerie curiosity to full-blown horror. underneath the stained mattress and tucked within a shallow crawl space carved crudely into the concrete floor, investigators uncovered remains, fragile, fragmented, and heartbreakingly small. A child's rib cage, a few teeth, pieces of a skull that had no business being there. DNA results confirmed what Daniel Whitaker's parents had feared for 2 decades, but never truly accepted. Their son had never left the house. He had died in it. Alongside the remains were time-locked artifacts: a tiny digital watch frozen at 3:17, a faded notebook with comic book doodles, a flashlight long corroded by battery acid, and the threadbare blanket Daniel had refused to sleep without. Everything was exactly as it might have been in 2001, as if the room had preserved him not just in body, but in memory. Dust blanketed the scene like a shroud, undisturbed for 20 years, and yet his handwriting was still visible in the notebook's margins, his name scribbled again and again, like a boy trying not to forget himself. Detectives didn't speak much as they collected the evidence, their gloves brushing over remnants of a childhood swallowed by silence. There were no ropes, no signs of a struggle. Just one terrible truth settling into the corners of the room like mold, that someone had lured Daniel here, locked him in, and left him to vanish in the dark, footsteps fading upstairs while he waited for help that never came. And the house, with its clean siding and trimmed hedges, had carried that secret like a coffin carries the dead. Quiet, heavy, and unforgiving. The whisper of memory came from an old man on the edge of town, the kind of neighbor whose days were measured by porch shadows and the scent of evening rain. He told police that back in the summer of 2001, not long after Daniel Whitaker vanished, he'd seen a man hauling tools into the Whitaker home well after dark. No official renovation had been scheduled, and the figure, thin, tense, wearing a cap pulled low, had ignored his wave, ducking into the garage with something slung over his shoulder. At the time, the site hadn't raised alarm. After all, it was a new house, and contractors were always coming and going. But the unease he felt that night never quite left him. When news broke about the hidden room, that sliver of unease turned into dread. He reached out to authorities with the detail, unsure if it mattered. It did. Investigators cross-referenced the construction permits from the home's original build and found a subcontractor's name buried in the early blueprints. A man hired briefly, never officially listed, and paid in cash. His name was Raymond Kessler, a journeyman handyman who drifted from site to site. Kessler had a sealed juvenile record and later arrests for breaking and entering, one involving a teenage girl's home. The most chilling part wasn't his past. It was that he vanished in late September 2001, just days after Daniel's disappearance. No forwarding address, no tax filings, just a trail of motel stays and burner phones leading into nothing. Police had overlooked him before, but now he was the only name that fit inside the walls of that hidden room. And the more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Kessler hadn't been fixing anything that summer. He'd been building a secret meant to trap and silence. A man no one remembered had slipped through the cracks, leaving behind a room, a body, and a story that had waited 20 years to be heard. The break came in a dingy trailer park in rural Arkansas, where a tip from an old coworker led U.S. Marshals to a man calling himself Rick Dalton. But fingerprints told another story. He was Raymond Kessler, the vanished contractor, the man who had once crawled beneath the Whitaker home to build a secret no child should ever see. When officers kicked down the door, he didn't run. He simply raised his hands, calm, as though he'd been expecting this moment for years. Under interrogation, Kessler's confession unfolded like a cracked tape, halting, grotesque, incomplete. He admitted to luring Daniel into the basement with a promise of a hidden clubhouse. He said he built the room not out of necessity, but curiosity. He wanted to see how long a kid could last. No ransom, no sexual motive, just a fascination with control. He talked about silence like it was a substance, a thing he could mold. Said Daniel had cried at first, then stopped, and eventually just sat there, watching the door that never opened. The words chilled even the most hardened detectives because there was no passion in his voice, just calculation. He didn't consider it murder. He called it containment. Kessler described checking the room daily for the first week, then less often, until eventually he sealed it and left town, assuming the problem would disappear with time. And in a way, it had. For 20 years, that hidden room had been his secret monument, a monument to a crime committed not out of rage, but out of the coldest kind of emptiness. As the tape recorder clicked off, one detective whispered that the scariest monsters were never the loud ones. They were the ones who built rooms in silence, walked away, and somehow slept soundly through the years. The revelation of Daniel Whitaker's fate sparked a fury that spread far beyond the quiet town that had once dismissed his disappearance as a tragic fluke. The hidden room, its existence, its location, and the sickening details of what occurred inside was replayed across every television screen, newspaper headline, and social media feed for weeks. Parents across the country stared at their own walls differently. Questions exploded. How could a contractor with a record slip through? How did no inspector catch a sealed, windowless chamber in a brand new home? Why had no one thought to dig deeper when Daniel vanished? Local officials scrambled to explain, but their answers fell flat against the backdrop of a grieving mother, now older and thinner, clutching a school photo of her son from 2 decades ago. Protesters gathered outside town hall, demanding resignations. Lawmakers proposed sweeping legislation almost overnight, mandatory post-construction inspections, national contractor background checks, new protocols for re-evaluating cold cases every 5 years. The home where Daniel disappeared was demolished under public pressure, replaced by a plaque and a tree, but the roots of the outrage reached much farther. Teachers told their students his story. Journalists called it the most chilling example of overlooked evil in modern suburbia. People no longer whispered Daniel's name. They spoke it with the weight of collective guilt. And as laws were signed and committees formed, the public understood this wasn't just about one boy in one town. It was about all the systems that had been built with cracks wide enough to hide monsters. What happened to Daniel forced everyone to ask, how many other rooms might still be sealed? How many other stories buried under floorboards, waiting for someone to hear them? The Whitakers hadn't set foot on the property in nearly 2 decades, but when the town invited them back for a memorial, they came. Older, quieter, but still tethered to the corner lot, where their son had vanished into nothing. The house looked different, freshly painted, trimmed hedges, laughter spilling faintly from neighboring yards. But to Claire and Michael Whitaker, it still pulsed with the same ache, like a wound poorly hidden under fresh skin. They stood beside the polished plaque embedded into the ground, in memory of Daniel Whitaker, 1992 to 2001. May the silence never return. There was a ceremony, soft applause, a few shared tears, but what followed was quieter. A demolition crew tearing into the back wall where the false hallway had once led to Daniel's prison. Dust spilled like smoke from a forgotten grave, and yet those who lived nearby swore the air never quite cleared. One neighbor reported hearing muffled sobs at night, long after the room had been leveled. Another claimed their thermostat kept dropping near where the secret door once stood, no matter how many times they replaced it. Paranormal or not, people believed the silence Daniel endured had left a mark that renovation couldn't erase. And then there were the blueprints. Those blueprints. Public records showed the original plans never included that room. But when journalists obtained copies from the construction company, a thin, scribbled rectangle was visible in the corner, right where the space had been found. Not labeled, not explained. Just there. As if the house had tried to tell someone all along. A contractor had signed off, an inspector had missed it, or ignored it. Either way, a room not meant to exist had swallowed a child whole, and now the house, no matter how updated or bright, carried that weight like a ghost stitched into its foundation. As the Whitakers placed a single white flower at the base of the plaque and walked away, the town exhaled, but the house did not. Because the blueprints never lied, people just refused to look.